Why should cybersecurity professionals work for local government entities?
If you just look at my career, there's a lot of people that believed in me and gave me more responsibility than I probably would have gotten in the private sector. And I think the most important part of it really is one of the main reasons a lot of people join public sector is the actual mission. You're able to actually help out my fellow Californians and the citizens of the state and the people around you, and really help communities that are either disadvantaged.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for making time. Welcome to Cyber Sierra's Safe Tech Talks.
Hi, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot for making time today. You have had a stellar career over the last decade over various aspects of cybersecurity, especially working with local government agencies. I find that very unique, but I will hand over to you to do a quick intro about yourself for our viewers.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hudson. My current role with the state of California is I'm the Information Security Officer and Privacy Officer for the Department of Rehabilitation. I've worked for that department for about 5 years in various security roles, most recently my current role. I've worked for the state for about 7 to 8 years, starting as a student assistant, which is kind of like the intern of the state at Department of Aging, and then I worked a few years at Department of Child Support Services in their privacy unit. And then before that, I did help desk in private sector.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. This almost 7 odd years plus working with government agencies, especially in California, really intrigues me. So let me start off with the first question. Why should cybersecurity professionals work for local government entities?
I think it really depends on where you're at in your career. So I'll kind of break that down for you. If you're just starting out in your cybersecurity career, I think the state will offer you more opportunities than maybe the private sector would. And by that, I mean, in the private sector, I think you'll get siloed a lot quicker into a certain niche, whereas in the public sector, we don't have as many people to fill security positions. So you're going to get a broader range of cybersecurity skills. If you just look at my career, there's a lot of people that believed in me and gave me more responsibility than I probably would have gotten in the private sector. And I think the most important part of it really is one of the main reasons a lot of people join public sector is the actual mission. You're able to actually help out my fellow Californians and the citizens of the state and the people around you, and really help communities that are either disadvantaged, and that if you're not going to fill that security role, who will? And a lot of these organizations, there's not an alternative. If Target gets breached, you can go to Walmart. You have an alternative. With a lot of government utilities or departments, you don't have an alternative. If you want to drive your car, you have to go to the DMV. If you want a passport, you have to go to this entity. And some, there is no choice. Like my information is with the Social Security Administration. I don't have a choice in that matter. So you're really kind of doing a public good, and you're able to really see the benefits of that in your everyday life. Whereas the more for-profit basis of the private sector, you kind of feel more like you're in a machine. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why I stuck with the public sector in the state of California.
So Ryan, that unique experience of helping the folks that you're working with, that is very, very unique. So is there a specific story where the work that you did ended up, touching some lives and things that has left a long-lasting memory with you?
I really think of a specific example where it was like, oh, I did this and then it caused this chain reaction. I think it's more of, you see examples of when someone's information gets disclosed, there's no real taking that back. And you definitely don't want to force someone to make the choice between, say, getting food stamps and not getting food stamps because they're concerned about the irreparable harm that them losing information. So it's kind of more of that realization when it was like, hey, I'm working for the state government. I see how much information they have. And then just thinking the possibility of, hey, there's hardly anybody working in security like in this unit, and we have so much information that is far more than most private sector entities would ever have. And a lot of these people don't have a choice, or they do have a choice, but it's a very bad one. It's either you get these services that can potentially improve your life, or you don't get them. Um, and so it seemed like kind of a good a good gesture. I could basically improve my cybersecurity skills by growing in the state, and obviously get paid, and also kind of uh, do something that I could, lay my head at night knowing that I did a public service compared to just get a paycheck and clock out.
You can go to sleep very, very proud that you have done that public service. Ryan, this is just one government agency, right? There are so many government agencies, and now that you mention it, the amount of data all of them hold is paramount and significant. So, do the government agencies collaborate internally to make sure the information security is upheld and the posture is being uplifted? And if yes, how and where are the areas of improvement?
Yeah, so for reference, again, this is not going to include like your counties and your like universities and local schools and et cetera. But there's about 232 state entities. Some of these entities are like 4 people. Other entities are like 20,000 people. But there's about 232 unique entities between departments, councils, different types of entities in the state of California. Just for reference, the state has about 200,000 state workers, give or take. For instance, Wyoming only has 600,000 people. So you can just see, like, if you expand the scope of states, not just California, there's some states where their IT sector is going to be very small in their government, and then you have California, which is the size of basically a country. Um, so how the coordination is obviously going to be a lot more difficult because you just the size of it. So there has been some efforts in the actual coordination. There is an entity called the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, or CalSIC. So that is an integration center for the most of the state entities are integrated in there. There is representation for CISA, which is like Homeland Security. There's representation from the FBI. So there is, and that's how a lot of the coordination, like this entity, if you are say like a local county or a school district, you can also sign up for their services. Their services can include incident response. It can include just like cybersecurity notices, or event notifications as far as vulnerabilities, and just kind of like daily briefs. And a lot of the times this organization will kind of coordinate the communication. Again, it's not perfect because a lot of times, for example, there might be a state hospital that gets breached, and it's a private sector entity, um, and they only technically have to report their breach to someone they have a data exchange agreement with, or like a legal binding agreement with. And that might only be a few departments, but my department might not have a data exchange agreement with them, but I might have, say, like 5 people that email back and forth to this entity for maybe job placement or whatever my department's role is. And so sometimes it's can be a wild goose chase when we're hunting down, like, hey, we're hearing rumors that this department got, or not department, but entity got hacked. Can anybody confirm it? So sometimes it ends up who uh, kind of coordinating with it. So there could be some work as far as that integration piece. But within the state departments, I think that it's a pretty solid integration. Thankfully, there hasn't been too many California state entities that have even gotten hacked at the state level. Unfortunately, that can't be said for the local cities and municipalities. At least in 2019 and 2020, there was quite a few that got compromised. But that's kind of a brief overview of kind of how the communication occurs at the state level.
It seems that the central state bodies have actually gone ahead and done something similar to, Cloudflare, right? Like have enough information that if somebody's getting breached, that threat intelligence goes to others, which is at least a very good step in the right direction. Obviously, if there are more private entities that join, that information just gets richer, and automation helps on that threat intel very, very much. Let me move on to a separate question on that government side. There's generally a public perception that government agencies might be working a little behind private sector in terms of their tech stack. They're using legacy systems. Have you seen that? What are the challenges with it, and how do you navigate cybersecurity around such challenges?
I think it's a very department specific, entity specific one. For example, you might have one department where their core systems are all legacy, and you might have another one where they have been able to migrate off of those legacy systems. I know in my standpoint, thankfully, a lot of our core systems are not legacy. I can give some examples, like for example, we had a legacy VPN. This was in like 2019, right before COVID. We migrated off of that VPN, I would say maybe a month before COVID, so like February of 2020. And our initial proof of concept was like 300 people. And then COVID hit like a week after we had finished our deployment, and we had to go from 300 people to 2,000 people working remotely. And we were able to do that because the solution we had chose was already installed on everybody's endpoints, because it was also the web filtering. So the agent was kind of a dual purpose. Whereas if we were on that legacy system where it was more hardware based, we would not have been able to migrate 2,000 people, because like everybody else, we would have had to go out and purchase hardware when everybody else was trying to purchase hardware. Another example on the security side is we were already thinking about in 2019 of, hey, what is our services, which Department of Rehabilitation, we service people with disabilities on the education side and job placement side. And so sometimes that means we have to go out into the community and reach them instead of them having to go to our office. And so we were kind of transitioning to that on the technical side, saying, hey, at the technical level, how do we support that? And we had an endpoint protection where the vendor's like, yeah, it's EDR only when you're on-prem, because it needs to communicate with a central server to do the EDR piece. And once you go off, if you don't have a VPN to go back to the central management server, you lose all EDR capability and you can't even really central manage it. But here's the thing, it was the cheapest solution out of all the endpoint protection solutions we looked at. But we're like, yeah, that's not acceptable, because we're thinking of going more mobile with our counselors and going out in the field. And so we transitioned to a cloud-based endpoint protection platform that then, when COVID hit, allowed us to not have to burn our remote access solution with connections back to a central management server, and was cloud-based. So I guess I'll go back to the actual legacy and how you handle it. Obviously, not every single time you can migrate off a legacy system. So it's really going to be like doing an inventory of your systems and your data. Does your data reside on these legacy systems? If yes, how are you going to protect it? And typically, the actual system itself can't do a lot of that protection. It's going to be kind of this game of, can I stop the attacker before they even reach my legacy system? Because if they get to my legacy system, it's typically not going to have the identity access management, or the actual, it might have just a straight up vulnerability that they can do a no user interaction exploit and just get right into it. Or the actual like logging is just not there. So you're not going to be able to see what they're doing in that system. It's like black box to you. So there's, you could do, I don't know, they have to SSH and you basically have a reverse proxy to get into it prior to it. So you have a system in front of it that's kind of providing that more single sign-on before they reach the actual, say, I don't know, terminal for a mainframe. So that's kind of the game you have to play if you can't migrate off of it. Which unfortunately, like especially the federal government in 2019, the I forgot which entity it was. I think it was the Government Accountability Office. For 10 systems at the federal government level, $337 million was spent on the maintenance of those legacy systems. And if you ever maintain a legacy system, you end up being you can't even hire people to maintain the system because the colleges are no longer teaching how to say maintain a mainframe. And so it ends up being almost untainable to keep these systems because you're having to get really expensive contractors or you're having to go get really expensive training to even maintain it. So it really, the longer you wait for legacy systems, it gets more expensive, and it's really kind of, you then have to prioritize it. It's like, okay, this system has critical data, and it's a legacy system. So what are we going to do here? Another thing I've seen us do is at the state level, you don't host it yourself. You transfer the risk and you have a third party host it. So there's a California Department of Technology. They do a lot of hosting for state entities. And so a lot of our legacy systems are hosted there. And so we've kind of transferred some of the risk to a third party, and they're kind of taking care of a lot of the security at that low level, network level, port security level for us. Just because, again, we only have so many programmers and technical know-how that know how to use the mainframe. And so if we had to do that ourselves, it just wouldn't be feasible.
You touched on quite a few great points. You touched on how you evaluated a new technology before migrating out. You touched on how the considerations you have to make on legacy systems literally put layers in front of it so that they don't get to that system. You touched on people problem, right? Information security, cybersecurity is going through a massive tailwind, and not enough people around the globe to support it. And lastly, the fourth point where you said that you're able to transfer risk. Now, that gives me a treasure trove of follow-up questions. Let's start with the first one, the way you evaluate software, right? And you gave a very good example of the EDR. Is there like a checklist of top three things that you go through from a business scenario or a business impact before you go and say, okay, these are even worth speaking, taking the conversation further?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think even before you select what solutions you want, from like a vendor level, you have to look at, hey, especially at me at a state level, I have to pick and choose what even solutions I can cover. I just don't have the budget to go out and cover all the areas I need to cover. So then I'm really at a risk-based approach saying, hey, which things am I going to have to live without? Like a central governance risk and compliance system. I can't afford one, so I just have to do things in spreadsheets. So even that, there's a thing that the California CDT Office of Information Security, they released a few years back, which was called the Cal Secure Roadmap. And essentially, it defined what they wanted all state entities to prioritize. And it's actually a pretty decent list as far as what security solutions do you want to focus on. There's also things like the Center for Information Security, top 18 was the SANS top 20. Where you can use to kind of prioritize. There's also frameworks like the NIST risk management framework or the NIST cybersecurity framework where you can really see, hey, what kind of key areas do we need to cover? So once you've kind of decided like, hey, this area is going to have the most risk and it's the impact is going to be high if it's exploited in this area, and it's just kind of uh, a basic control. So like let's say endpoint protection or mail security. Then you really go into, you said like what kind of like top three things. Uh, one key thing, at least in my organization, it should be in every organization, is the actual accessibility, both on the practitioner side, so like my unit or whoever is going to be managing it. Yeah, can a screen reader person who has to use a screen reader, can they actually look at the dashboard, or is it going to give them gibberish? Because I don't want to, when I'm hiring, be like, oh, I can't hire someone who's blind because my system isn't screen reader accessible. And on the flip side, on the user side, if it's something like, say, secure awareness training, or it's email security where it gives them a user a pop-up of, say, like, hey, are you sure you want to send this email to somebody, like a DLP solution? I have a lot of users who use screen readers or maybe text to speech, and it's a non-starter if only a portion of my staff can actually use the security solution, whether that be security awareness or even like logging in. So like, for example, I couldn't use hardware tokens that had a screen that read out the code, because obviously if you're blind, you can't read the screen. So that really changed how we did multi-factor authentication, because we had to have options that everybody could use. And it really, when you go down that road, if a vendor hasn't really thought of accessibility, it really shows the maturity of it too. So sometimes they can really weed out those immature solutions for you when you say, hey, have you thought of accessibility? The second part is also going to be price. And what I mean by price is not necessarily you're not going to go for the most expensive solution, but does the most expensive solution worth its value? Um, so does it have the facts to back it up? Does it have this feature set to back it up? But the cost. Because if it has additional feature set, like for example, let's say you're thinking of going towards like orchestration for like automation. Does the more expensive solution have that ability to work with other solutions and automate more easily and thus save you more money in the long run? Or is it more expensive just because they advertise on a race team, like a car race team? Um, and then I guess the last one is going to be, uh, if I had to do the last one, I'm not really sure. It really goes into a lot, and it really depends on what you're actually like what the actual tool is. But I guess it would be the support. So the big difference between, say, freeware and something you pay for is the support on the training side, like the user training side, and also the, hey, if I get compromised, is this vendor actually going to back up their product and fly someone out to support me, or am I on my own? Or just even something more simple like, I need to configure the dashboard for single sign-on. Am I on my own for that configuration, or is the vendor going to have support? And a lot of times that's why you pay for a product half the time, is so that you can have someone to help you support it. Because especially when you have a small team, and you don't always have the expertise in that field, you're paying for the more expensive solution because it's easier to use and it comes with that support, so that you don't have to fill that role with a full position. You can just buy a solution to compensate the lack of staffing.
Ryan, the first point on accessibility really touched a note. I understand what you're saying, that everybody should think about it. I'm not sure whether everybody does, but that unique example you gave really touched a note with me. Thanks for sharing that. I can see how that will be your first consideration when you look at it. On that same note of considerations of which security tools you look at, there's obviously a lot of talk about emerging technology in the past 12 to 15 months. And is there any security trend, cybersecurity trend, that really worries you?
I think there's a few, and a few I'm curious about. Like I'm kind of see, it's kind of like the Y2K bug, back in the day, where is it going to end the world, or is it just going to be another Tuesday? One of them is obviously the one everybody's talking about, is generative AI. Microsoft just released with OpenAI an article basically on 5 advanced persistent threat actors that they identified using ChatGPT and the usages of what they were doing. And it really came down to three things. One was reconnaissance, basically saying, hey, who is an expert in, say, satellite imagery? Or like, how do you interface with satellites? Another one was general like IT troubleshooting on like setting up infrastructure or setting up code or how to evade EDR. Um, and then I believe the last one, if I recall, was just general like phishing. So like, hey, again, a lot of these threat actors maybe English as their second language, so they're kind of helping using generative AI to help them write more fine-grained spear phishing or voicemail, whatever it be. So those were the three, but you have to keep in account for that report. That's only them using a third party. So we don't really know what they're on their side creating their own AI implementations, because obviously they're not going to do everything via third-party solution they can't control, and obviously then is maybe potential threat intelligence for the defender. So like I think my biggest concern is it's already difficult for users to spot phishing, and even beyond phishing, there's been a lot of examples of someone like sampling, say, a director's voice and then calling up somebody and saying, hey, wire transfer $25 million to this bank account. And a lot of times we say, oh, why, how do they fall for it? But sometimes it can be very, very convincing. And it's that kind of paradigm where phishing is already a problem and now it just got better. So how do we defend and protect our users in that regard when a lot of these attacks go via phishing, and now it's a lot more believable. So I think that's my concern. The other concern I have kind of relating to that is the mean time to delivery of malware, or maybe the creation of an attack. And what I mean by that is in like 2019, this is via the CrowdStrike report from 2023. Again, that's information on 2022, so this is already almost 2 years old. In 2019, the mean time delivery from a 0-day to exploit being typically delivered to the wild was 60 days. In 2022, it was 4 days. So that was before ChatGPT and all these automated tools were readily accessible. You can only imagine that is well below 4 days now. So what that means is, you look at all the Fortinet vulnerabilities and a lot of the gateway, the directly internet accessible devices that are being attacked, and how quickly they're able to go from, the 0-day exploit being announced to the attacker, creating the infrastructure, creating the exploit, creating, the actual command and control response for it, and then, generating emails and phishing emails to maybe exploit part of it too. It just makes it a lot harder for the defender, because you no longer have as much time to respond to these. You have to be a lot more on top of it. You no longer have the ability to maybe wait till the weekend to patch. Some of these you might have to patch and actually cause business downtime for these systems if you have nothing beyond that initial, say, firewall. And if that firewall gets breached, there's nothing behind it to protect you. So I think that's what really concerns me. And the last thing, which is the Y2K thing I mentioned earlier, is quantum computing. There's a lot being praised or said about quantum computing, about its ability to beat encryption and just, all that encryption entails. Our public key infrastructure, is completely reliant on encryption. And just the idea of, hey, they don't even need to phish their user, they can just straight up crack the password over the wire. Or the even more scary idea is that let's say a threat actor, they compromise an entity, but the information is encrypted. They exfil the data anyways and store it somewhere, and they're just waiting till they have the processing power to break that encryption. So you thought you were safe because it's encrypted. Well, no, they're just waiting until they have the power. The kind of the X factor with quantum computing is it's not like ChatGPT where it's more of a software. Like quantum computing is, hardware based. So it'd be really interesting to see, how readily available it is, because the whole issue of AI is not that AI has been around, and the idea has been around since the 1950s. The issue with AI right now is how readily accessible the generative AI nature of it is, and just anybody can use it. Same thing with how computers were when they were first introduced. It wasn't that they are novel; it's just they are now more accessible. I think that's the thing I'm very curious about with quantum computing is when it becomes more accessible, are we going to have time to react to its its effect on us? And the other X factor for quantum computing is AI is very resource intensive, and AI is going to supercharge, or quantum computing is going to supercharge AI. And what does that mean for AI? So that's kind of the things I've been thinking about as far as the future of cybersecurity.
The quantum computing and AI working together has been a thought process that we also look at very much. And we feel that controls monitoring is a way to safeguard that. Doesn't matter where technology goes, how many attacks, because I think JP Morgan said they're getting attacked 4 billion times a day.
Mhm.
If encryption goes for a toss with quantum computing, then what do you monitor, right? Because if you were to put in all those events into a SIEM solution, the amount of billing that you'll have to go to SIEM will break the budget, right? So we feel it's controls monitoring, but we'll reserve that for another conversation, Ryan. Yes, I think everybody is looking at that. The other point that you mentioned around people, and I believe recently Forrester came out and said instead of calling it, training awareness, it's human risk management. And a lot of like SANS Institute, everybody is going that route that it has to be people that becomes the first line of defense. I think these two will evolve a lot more in the
Mhm.
areas as you mentioned is going to evolve. Um, Going to back to the 4 points you had mentioned, there was one you mentioned on risk transfer, right? Legacy systems, people not able to handle, go to a centralized body that can handle for you and do some sort of risk transfer. This would be my last question today is when it comes to risk transfer, people also think about cyber insurance. And we have had this very interesting conversation. I would love you to share with our viewers. Do you buy cyber insurance as a government entity? And if not, why not?
Well, currently, Door does not. I think there's a lot of considerations when you look at cyber insurance. It's going to be a lot different depending on the entity, because again, you have to kind of look at what cyber insurance provides. So it's going to provide that the legal handling as far as fines, penalties, etc. It's going to handle that communication with the public or the users. It's going to potentially provide the expertise for an incident, and then it's also going to potentially provide the payment or coverage of both the downtime and potentially if it's a ransomware attack, the payment to ransomware. A lot of those are provided by Office of Information Security or the California Integration Center, or like at least at the state level. A lot of those you can get elsewhere. Maybe not the payment, maybe not that legal protection, um, but the cost of cybersecurity insurance is quite large for what it provides, especially when you look at like the history of it. It's gotten more and more expensive, especially for state entities, because again, we're high risk in that we're very public, uh, you know, but compared to our budget and our security budget and our security staffing, it doesn't match our exposure level. So we're very expensive to insure. So it really comes down to, hey, is what I'm getting from cyber insurance, can I get it elsewhere? And a lot of that from the expertise for incident response, the legal considerations, um, the like coordinating with the external parties. A lot of times you can get that support from other entities. So then it really comes down to the payment like, hey, the payment of both the ransomware and the payment of the downtime, uh, and also just the legal liability section. Um, and so for door, it's just the cost right now doesn't make sense. And cybersecurity insurance is really interesting in that it's, do you start and try and integrate cyber insurance from the very beginning because like you're so vulnerable, like your likelihood of being compromised is that much higher? Or do you use it at the very end to kind of mitigate that residual risk? Because if you do it at the very start, it's, one, might not even be possible depending on how mature you are, and two, is going to be ridiculously expensive. And at the tail end, it's like, do you even need it? There's kind of two competing ideas. Is it defeatism to basically say like, oh, you're just assuming you're going to get breached? I would say no. I think there's still a place for cybersecurity insurance. I would definitely, if I was say at the local county level, if I was a school, a local school, I would definitely consider it a lot more, because again, it would be a lot harder for me to kind of compensate for, say that expertise, incident response expertise, that legal advice, kind of, again, it's a risk decision. So it's, do I spend my money on something that I'm getting a lot of value elsewhere, and I spend that money in more proactive ways, or I do, because cyber insurance, again, at the end of the day, it's completely reactive, and it it only takes effect and only helps you when you've been compromised. So it becomes this kind of dance between, do I improve my backups? Do I improve my ability, my redundancy, or do I go to cyber insurance? Because a lot of times, cyber insurance for state entities, the cost is like their whole cyber budget. It's not even feasible. That's why you've seen a lot of local municipalities in the U.S. They'll actually, like say they're in the same state, they'll pool their money together and they'll pay part of it there, and then they'll maybe get cyber insurance on top of that. So like the residual, like let's say that group of municipalities that have that agreement where they pull their funds together, and if one gets hacked, they pull out of that fund. Well, then they'll put like cyber insurance on top of that to like say like, maybe they want $1 million fund, and so they have 500,000, so cyber insurance covers the other 500,000. So you've seen really creative ideas because a lot of these state entities or public entities are getting priced out of cyber insurance because again, the attackers right now are going after the low-hanging fruit because the private sector, especially the big players, have gone a lot more mature. So the difficulty of hacking them has gone up, whereas the local municipalities, local public entities, they haven't really been able to keep up, and so it's you're going to kind of wiggle the door, so to speak, on each entity, and if you find someone, you're just going to go in. You don't care if they can pay or not. It's a lot because a lot of times these are automated attacks. So they're kind of going after the low-hanging players because it's more of, okay, if I compromise 10, one's going to probably pay. Whereas if I compromise the big player, even if I get in, they might have such a robust recovery plan, they're not even going to have to pay because they just restore the next day. And they're like a lot of these cyber actors, they know these public entities only have a few people with a limited budget to protect a lot of sensitive information. So if you're looking at it from the data aspect, these public entities are they're very prime targets because high value information with not a lot of protection behind them. And the other part of it too is like if I were say like a hospital or I was a police entity, I probably would have cyber insurance just because I think that's typically the time when you want to pay is when people's lives are on the line. Whereas if my organization gets compromised, nobody's going to die. It's not going to be a fun day. I don't want that to happen, but nobody's going to die. Whereas a lot of these entities, yeah, I think nobody's really going to question if it's like, hey, if we don't pay, someone's life support's going to go out, or we're not going to be able to coordinate, ambulance coming into the hospital. or the police officers in the field aren't going to be able to communicate, I think people are going to understand if you pay the ransom. And then the last thing I would add is this isn't in California, but in Florida and North Carolina, they both released laws that public entities cannot pay ransom. So that right there it kind of throws out a big benefit of cyber insurance. So I'm not sure if California will go that way. I know like New York and maybe Pennsylvania were also considering similar laws. There's obviously pros and cons to those laws. But again, it's sometimes a little harder for state entities to even consider paying ransom. And especially if it's outlawed, even if you have cyber insurance, you're not going to be able to pay it, at least not legally.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. That context of ransomware just being made illegal in a few states, which takes the context out of cyber insurance big time, is something very intriguing, which I obviously learned during our conversation. Any parting thought for our viewers, Ryan?
No, I definitely thank you for the time. It was a really great conversation. Definitely, if anybody's considering cybersecurity or is a current cybersecurity professional, I definitely encourage them to look at working for not just the state of California, but any local entity. I think it may not pay the best, but it definitely is a very rewarding experience.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for your time today, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.